Hey everybody, welcome to another episode here on Bully Whispers, and we are here today to discuss who came out on top in the conflict between Avon Barksdale and Marlo Stanfield. Now there are a few things to note before digging in, namely that this isn't like a basketball game and can't be judged in the same manner. Wars end in one of a few ways. Surrender, which clearly didn't happen here. Annihilation, also clearly didn't happen since they were both alive at the end. Or a peace treaty, which I also think didn't happen here, but we will get into that later. Next, judging won't be as simple as checking the scoreboard and seeing the body count. Now, while this does count for something and will be looked into, it is possible to lose significantly more troops and still win. Lastly, and fairly significantly in this case, you can have more than one war going on at the same time, as evidenced by the fact that they each had their own struggles with Prop Joe independently of each other. Also, both were always at war with the police, and since it's the police that took them both down, you can't blanketly say that one of them beat the other. So, how will we evaluate and judge who won? In this episode, we will examine the conflict by breaking it down into three parts. The street war, which is when both of them were on the streets and fighting. The part that I will call the Cold War, since it's only diplomacy after Avon goes to jail. And each of their positions at the end, which is where we will take into account what their respective goals were. Fortunately for us, in this case they both want the same things, a big reputation and a crown. And it's important to note here that for neither of them is it primarily about the money. In fact, the only major underworld figures in the show that you could say were all about business were the Greeks. With Avon, it's obvious from the start of the series that things such as family and ego can be more important, but even Marlo, who considers himself to be all business...
Told you before, I'm making my business to keep an ear to the ground.
I'm making my business to do business.
Really isn't.
Man got clubs. One day soon, I'm walking out with a rose here.
If Marlo really wanted a rose that bad, he could have just bought one. But Marlo's thrill is in beating people. He wanted to beat that guy out of a rose, and he wasn't opposed to losing a lot of money to do so. When evaluating the street war, we must first acknowledge how successful Marlo was in getting Avon to fall for his famed retreat strategy, hook, line, and sinker.
Boy, Marlo closed up shop. Word is, he wholesaled his packages from there. He ain't got no crews out here at all.
Not coming out to claim what's ours. Police leave them corners, he's gonna be back out there.
I know he will.
Now there are several reasons this strategy may have worked so well. He obviously wasn't very familiar with Marlo yet, and he may not have had to fight any real strategists on his way to the top. Even if he did, the physical setup of the high and low rise projects aren't really conducive to such a maneuver, so it is unlikely he would have encountered that strategy specifically. But whatever the reason, it was effective enough that they got close to killing Avon. Unfortunately for Marlo, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, and despite their early success, by the end the body count was similar on both sides. On top of that, most of Avon's losses were low-quality people and a girl who wasn't even really part of the crew. Unfortunately for Avon, just as he was about to begin his major offensive, he lost his war with the police because Stringer Bell was a turncoat. It's actually quite impressive how well Avon did despite the fact that his right-hand man was working behind his back, as I don't think Marlo would have done as well as Chris had done the same thing. Either way, Marlo comes out of the street war with the West Baltimore crown by default, but since he didn't actually beat Avon, it's not over yet. Also, while Avon may have lost one crown, he gained another, which will come into play later. Now before digging into the Cold War part, I'm going to take a second to address Marlo's stint as king. Not that it affects this discussion, but it's interesting to note that he only wears the crown for 10 episodes in the entire series, and for 2 of them he spends a good bit of time in jail. Remember, once he joined the co-op, he was no longer a king until he killed Prop Joe, but that's something for Marlo's character analysis episode. When deciding who came out on top of the Cold War period, it depends entirely on whether or not you think Avon was being sincere in his meetings with Marlo.
But fuck all them East Side bitches. That's just the way I feel about it. I got nothing but love in my heart for West Side niggas.
If he was being sincere, then he was essentially conceding to Marlo, and Marlo clearly won. Although that wouldn't affect his analysis in the next section one bit. Personally, I think Avon was messing with Marlo while also setting him up, and let me know if you disagree down in the comments. The obvious sign that he truly doesn't respect Marlo is when he calls him a businessman.
You want to cut Proposition Joe and all them other East Side bitches out to connect. I mean, you a natural businessman, right?
Which is the same thing he insultingly called Stringer. The other thing that stuck out to me were his mannerisms. specifically his West Side Stein. While Avon was never the understated type, that seems entirely too theatrical for him. To me, that's him rubbing Marlo's face in shit, which would be consistent with the tone of the conversation in general. As far as setting up Marlo, one thing to keep in mind is that Avon was always smart, he was just impulsive. After having some time to think, he usually saw the bigger picture.
Nigga String was right about this shit, man. That nigga was right.
And all he had in jail was time to think. The first thing he would have realized immediately, even without time to think, is that that introduction would be worth way more than $100,000. Now, while that number does have some symbolic significance due to the basketball game in Season 1, the real significance is that he wants Marlo to take it, because he knows that Marlo will take out Prop Joe shortly thereafter, essentially getting Marlo to take care of that for him, which is an aspect of Power Law 2, but we will get into that in the upcoming 48 Laws of Power in the Wire series. Lastly, he knew it wouldn't be long before Marlo fell. Even if the police didn't get him, now that he's king of the city, he would soon be at war with all of Baltimore because of how he conducts business.
One more thing. Price of the brick going up.
And Avon would have been in prime position to just introduce someone else and cut Marlo out. Either way, that's irrelevant because the police did get him, and although he got off due to police misconduct, he was forced to sell the Connect and retire from the game. So, who's in a better position at the end? It's easy to say Marlo because he is rich, free, and retired while Avon is in jail, but remember this is where we take into account what they wanted, and they wanted big names and a crown. When it comes to having a big name, it appears that Omar had them both beat as he was being glorified by the corner kids who didn't even know who Marlo was.
Do you know who I am?
Nigga, you know who I am?
Quick side note, I think it would have been cool if that guy had shot Marlo dead after being asked, looked over his body, and said, "No, who were you?" In keeping with the whole circular, there will always be another Marlo kind of theme. Anyways, another thing to remember is that Avon still has a crown, Marlo does not. In fact, Marlo is probably in the worst possible place for him that he could be in. He has to accept a boring world in which he could never have a crown, and he wants the street life, so much so that he would probably rather be dead or in jail. If he does try to go back into the game, he will have a bigger target on him from the police, an extremely bad reputation with all of the other major players in Baltimore, and a crew that's even more decimated than Avon's was when he got out. Ultimately, it's hard to say either of them won in the sense that they directly beat each other, so all that's really left to judge is who ended up in a better position. And while I would take Marlo's spot over Avon's any day, I think Marlo would rather have Avon's, so I'm going to have to give Avon the win on this one. Let me know what you think in the comments. Well, thanks for watching everybody. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.